The moment she wrinkled her nose and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, I felt my ears burn hotter than the thick wool collar around my neck. "Dad, you still wearing that old thing? You look like a homeless man." My daughter sneered, her voice slicing through the silence of the lawyer's office. Heads turned. Some chuckled softly. Others pretended not to hear. But the shame was already draped across me, heavier than any jacket could ever be. My daughter, blood of my blood, mocking me in front of strangers as though I were a stain she couldn't scrub away. I pressed my lips tight and sat still. I wanted to tell her what that jacket meant, the hours I worked, the winters it shielded me, the memories stitched into its frayed lining. But her words strangled me quiet. I swallowed my anger because the lawyer was about to begin reading my late brother's will, and dignity was the only armor I had left. The lawyer, Mr. Davis, cleared his throat and shuffled papers. His voice was calm, rehearsed, as though he'd done this 100 times before. "We're here to honor the last wishes of Mr. Walter Green," he said. "My brother, my younger brother who had always been smoother, richer, loved more by the world, now gone, and yet somehow still the center of attention even in death." As Mr. Davis read through the list of heirs, my daughter sat back, smirking, certain she'd be in line for something. She never knew the hours Walter and I spent together, the promises we made when we were boys. She never cared for the blood and sweat that came before the money. She only cared for appearances, the shine, the gloss, the image of being tied to the Green name. Then the lawyer paused, glanced up at me, and his finger tapped on the document. "And here," he said, his voice tightening just slightly, "we have a clause that requires validation. Mr. Green left behind a condition that hinges on this signature." He turned the page and slid it across the polished oak desk. My own name, written in my own shaky hand, stared back at me. A signature from years ago, from a time I barely remembered, binding me to something I hadn't thought of in decades. Gasps rose around the room. My daughter leaned forward, confused, her arrogance slipping for the first time that afternoon. The lawyer's finger pressed firmly on my name. "This signature, Mr. Green, is yours, correct?" My throat felt dry, but I nodded. "Yes, that's mine." Silence swallowed the room. My daughter's smirk evaporated. Whatever Walter had left behind wasn't going to her. Not so quickly, not so easily. And for the first time that day, I felt the faintest spark of revenge warming me from inside the old jacket she hated so much. "I suppose I should take you back, because nothing makes sense without the years that came before that humiliation. My name is Leonard Green. I'm 59 years old, and life has worn me thin in places, but I still stand tall when I can. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in a neighborhood where your reputation was worth more than your paycheck. My father gave me discipline, my mother gave me grace, and Walter, my younger brother, gave me trouble. He was charming, reckless, and people adored him for it. I was the responsible one, the one who worked steady jobs and kept the family afloat when things went south. But charm is louder than quiet sacrifice. When Walter rose in the business world, people called him a genius. I used to laugh because I knew the late-night calls he made to me, asking for advice, asking for loans, asking for backup when his gambles failed. I gave it to him, again and again, without resentment at first, because that's what older brothers do. We protect. But time has a way of turning protection into resentment when gratitude is replaced with entitlement. By the time Walter was wealthy, he acted like he had built his empire with no hands but his own. He forgot the loans. He forgot the advice. He forgot me. And yet, when his heart gave out at 62, it was me sitting in that law office, listening as his lawyer dragged my past into the present with that signature. My daughter, Erica, leaned close, whispering with a hiss, "What is this? Why is your name in Uncle Walter's will?" She said it like I'd stolen something, like the signature itself was a trick. I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel that same shame she had tossed at me minutes earlier. The jacket, the insults, the smirk. They were all suddenly so small compared to what was unfolding. Mr. Davis adjusted his glasses and began reading the clause. My pulse hammered. Walter, in his final act, had woven me into his estate in a way no one expected. Before distribution of any assets, the lawyer read, a condition must be fulfilled regarding an agreement made between myself, Walter Green, and my brother Leonard Green many years ago. The details are specified in this document, signed by both parties. My daughter's jaw dropped. My signature wasn't just a memory, it was a key, and whatever lock it fit into was about to turn. That night, after the will reading adjourned, I sat in my small kitchen staring at the jacket folded over the chair. It smelled faintly of cedar and age, a reminder of winters past. Erica's words echoed in my ears. You look like a homeless man. She didn't know that jacket had once belonged to her grandfather. She didn't care. To her, worth was measured in brands and shine, not in history and endurance. But Walter, he had remembered. Somehow, in his final days, he had reached back across the years to tie me into his story again. I couldn't decide if it was generosity, guilt, or some twisted game. All I knew was this. My humiliation in that office wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And as I folded that jacket carefully, smoothing its worn sleeves, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. A fire building quietly, steadily, waiting for the right moment to blaze. Have you ever lived something like this? A moment where the people you love most cut you deepest. Share it in the comments and subscribe. More people deserve this strength. The next morning, I returned to the lawyer's office. The document with my signature sat on his desk, waiting. Mr. Davis explained the details slowly, his voice careful, but the meaning was sharp. Walter had left behind a trust, a hidden reservoir of wealth and property, but its release depended on me, not Erica, not the others who had come expecting easy spoils. Me. Because decades ago, Walter and I had signed a pact that, in his death, he had chosen to honor. Erica stormed in midway through the explanation. Her face was flushed, her lips tight. This isn't fair, she snapped. Why him? Why my father, who never cared about money, who dresses like he found his clothes in the trash? She pointed at me with venom. Her words hit harder than any stranger's could, because she was my daughter, my flesh, and she wanted me small. Mr. Davis didn't flinch. He tapped my signature again. Because your father was there when it mattered. This isn't about appearance. This is about history. Erica's face twisted. She couldn't bear the idea that the man she ridiculed was the very man holding the key to her uncle's fortune. And in that moment, I realized something. My revenge wouldn't need fists or shouting. My revenge was already written, in ink older than her arrogance. But what I didn't know yet was the price, because Walter never gave anything without strings, and those strings were about to pull me deeper than I had imagined. The lawyer leaned forward. Mr. Green, do you remember the agreement you made with your brother in 1989? I closed my eyes, reaching back through decades, through jobs lost and found, through the days when my wife was still alive, through the laughter of children before it turned into disdain. And then it came to me, the pact, a promise made in youth, when Walter and I still believed in loyalty. I remembered my hand gripping the pen, Walter grinning, the smell of whiskey on his breath. I remembered signing my name, and what we promised that night could ruin or redeem everything now. But what exactly had I promised? Because memory fades, but ink does not. And what the lawyer slid across the table next made my stomach twist into knots. What he revealed would change the course of my family forever. Mr. Davis placed the yellowed paper on the desk like it was a sacred artifact. His fingers lingered on it before sliding it toward me. The edges were brittle, corners curled with time, and in the center were two signatures side by side, Walter's bold, sweeping strokes, and my own smaller, steadier hand. Above them, in neat typewriter ink, were the words, Pact of Honor, Green Brothers, 1989. My chest tightened. I remembered the night. I could still hear the scratch of Walter's pen on that exact page, his laughter echoing in our tiny apartment. We were both younger, restless, trying to carve our way into a world that didn't make room for men like us unless we forced it. Walter had been reckless, drunk, his pockets full of borrowed money and promises he couldn't keep. I was the anchor. And that night, he had convinced me to make a pact. Mr. Davis's voice cut through my memory. This agreement states that in the event of Walter's passing, the brother who remained loyal and fulfilled his end of the bargain would inherit not just assets, but also responsibility over specific properties Walter deemed vital. My daughter's eyes flashed with greed at the word inherit. She leaned in, her voice dripping with contempt. What bargain? My father hasn't done anything special. He's lived in the same crumbling house for years, clinging to that ugly jacket like it's gold. Her words stabbed deeper than she realized, but I didn't flinch. I was staring at the line in the document that spelled it all out. I, Walter Green, agree that should I die before my brother Leonard, the man who honors our father's teaching, keeps our mother's house, and carries the Green name with dignity, will be the sole trustee of all Green family assets. Signed, 1989. Erica read it over my shoulder, her face contorting. Mother's house. That dump. That's the condition. You just stayed in that falling-apart house because you were too stubborn to leave, not because you were noble. But she didn't understand. That house was more than brick and peeling paint. It was my parents' dream, the kitchen table where my mother taught me to pray, the porch where my father told us stories about resilience. When Walter fled the neighborhood chasing big money and grand schemes, I stayed. I kept the house alive. I carried the Green dignity when no one else would. And now, decades later, my stubbornness, the very thing my daughter mocked, was the key. Mr. Davis cleared his throat. Leonard, your brother placed the entirety of his estate, businesses, stocks, properties, and accounts, into this conditional trust. By the terms, you alone are entitled to manage it. Others may contest, but this document is legally binding. The room spun for a moment. I, a man mocked for his jacket, suddenly held the weight of a fortune. Erica's mouth fell open. Her painted nails tapped furiously on the table. That's ridiculous. He can't just hand everything to... Her voice cracked, and I saw it then. Not just greed, but fear. Fear that the man she had dismissed as weak was stronger than she imagined. I straightened my back. For years I had endured her sharp tongue, her rolling eyes, her constant embarrassment whenever I showed up in my simple clothes. Now, the roles were reversed. She was the one shrinking under the shadow of my name. Still, I knew Walter. He never gave without taking something in return. And sure enough, Mr. Davis raised a hand before I could speak. There is one additional clause. Walter insisted the brother who inherits must first uncover a sealed letter he left behind. Only when that letter is found and opened will the estate be released. A murmur rippled through the family members gathered. Erica's eyes darted to me, narrowed like knives. So it's not even yours yet, she snapped. But her voice trembled, because even she could sense this wasn't just a formality. Walter had set a test, a challenge that only I could face. That night I returned to my parents' old house, the one Erica called a dump. It smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil, a strange mixture of decay and memory. The floor creaked as I stepped inside, the same creak it had made when I was a boy sneaking in past curfew. I could almost hear my mother humming in the kitchen, almost see my father sitting at the table polishing his worn pocket watch. I stood there in the silence, my old jacket heavy around my shoulders, and when I whispered to myself, "Walter, what game are you playing now?" I lit a lamp and began searching. Drawers, closets, even under the loose floorboards in the living room. Nothing. Hours passed. My hands were raw from prying open old wood, my knees aching from kneeling on the cold floor. But I couldn't stop. Because I knew Walter. He would have hidden that letter where it mattered most, somewhere tied to our shared blood. Near midnight, I wandered into my father's old study. The air was thicker there, stale with years of disuse. Books lined the shelves, their spines cracked and faded. I pulled one down absent-mindedly, a Bible, its leather soft with age. As I flipped through, a folded envelope slid out, falling to the floor. My breath caught. The envelope was sealed with red wax, stamped with the Green family initial. On the front, in Walter's unmistakable hand, were 3 words, "For Leonard only." I sat heavily in the chair, the envelope trembling in my hands. My heart pounded as if I were holding not paper but dynamite. I broke the seal. Inside was a single letter, written in Walter's confident script. "Brother," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you found this, then you've proven what I always knew, that you were the one who stayed loyal when I didn't. But don't think this inheritance is a gift. It's a burden. The businesses I leave you are not clean. Some debts are buried deep, and some men will come knocking. Be ready. Carry our name with dignity, but sharpen your blade, because those who mocked you will try to break you. Start with the numbers in the safety deposit box. The key is hidden where only you would look." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a storm waiting to break. And yet, as I read those words, I felt something rise in me I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. My humiliation at the lawyer's office was no longer a wound, it was fuel. My daughter's cruelty was no longer a scar. It was proof. Walter had left me not just money, but a battlefield, and I was ready. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and held it to my chest. "You mocked me for my jacket," I whispered into the empty room, "but this jacket will see me through wars you can't even imagine." The next morning, Erica burst into the house uninvited. She had always moved like the place belonged to her, though she never lifted a finger to maintain it. Her eyes darted around, desperate. "Where is it? What did you find?" I looked at her calmly. "It's none of your business." Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "I deserve to know. I'm your daughter. Uncle Walter loved me too." I laughed then, bitter and low. "Loved you? He barely knew you. He left this for me because I was there when it mattered. Not you, not your greed, me." Her face crumpled with rage. "You can't handle it. You can't even afford a decent jacket. You'll lose everything before the month is over, and when you do, don't come crawling to me." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I sat back in my father's old chair, the envelope heavy in my pocket. My daughter's words stung, but beneath them, I heard the truth. She feared me now. She feared the power in my hands. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Because Walter was right. I would need dignity. Yes, but also a sharpened blade. And what waited in that safety deposit box was the beginning of my fight. What I didn't know yet was just how dangerous that inheritance truly was. Because when I found the key, tucked exactly where Walter promised, it opened more than a box. It opened a door to secrets that could burn my family to the ground, and once I stepped through, there would be no turning back. The key was taped beneath the bottom drawer of my father's desk, exactly where Walter said only I would think to look. My hands shook as I peeled it free, the tape brittle with age. I held it up to the light, a small brass key with the number 317 etched faintly on its head. My breath caught because that number was familiar. Decades ago, Walter had rented a safety deposit box at the First National Bank downtown. He had joked that it was where he would keep the secrets of the Green Empire, secrets too heavy for anyone but him to carry. Now those secrets belonged to me. I slipped the key into my jacket pocket, the old fabric cradling it like a relic, and walked out into the morning chill. The streets of Richmond hummed with life, cars honking, people hurrying to jobs, the scent of fresh coffee spilling from a corner shop. Ordinary sounds, ordinary smells. Yet everything felt sharpened, dangerous, as if the world itself knew I was walking toward a truth that would break me or build me. Inside the bank, the marble floor gleamed beneath my shoes. The clerk, A young man with nervous eyes glanced at the key and led me into the vault. Rows of boxes lined the walls, steel and silent. He guided me to 317, slid the key into the lock, and stepped back. I pulled the door open, heart pounding, and lifted out a long metal box. Alone in the private viewing room, I unlatched it. Inside were 3 objects: a bundle of old photographs tied with twine, a leather-bound ledger thick with handwritten notes, and a stack of envelopes sealed with the Green family crest. My fingers hovered over the photographs first. I untied the twine and spread them out on the table. Faces stared back at me, frozen in time. Walter with businessmen in suits I didn't recognize. Walter shaking hands with men whose eyes were too cold, too sharp. One photograph made me flinch. It was my own face, younger, standing beside Walter at a construction site. I had forgotten that day, but the image dragged it back. We were standing in front of half-built foundations, smiling for the camera, and behind us was a sign that read, Green Development Project. I remembered now. Walter had pulled me in as a silent partner, said it was just paperwork, just for appearances. I signed where he told me, and then I forgot. But here it was, immortalized in ink and paper, my name tied to something bigger than I ever knew. I shoved the photographs aside and opened the ledger. Lines of numbers marched across the pages. Payments, withdrawals, names coded in shorthand, addresses scrawled in the margins. I flipped faster, my stomach twisting tighter with each entry. These weren't simple business records. They were debts, favors, transactions with men whose names carried whispers in the city, names tied to gambling, laundering, and things darker still. My brother's empire had not been clean. It had been built on shadows, and somewhere in those shadows, my signature might still be glowing like a target. I slammed the ledger shut, sweat on my forehead, and reached for the envelopes. I broke the seal on the first. Inside was a letter, Walter's handwriting again, firm and unapologetic. Brother, by now you've seen the photos and the books. You understand the truth. I made deals with men who will not forget. I kept you out of it as best I could, but your name is tied to projects that made me rich and made others powerful. Now that I am gone, they will come looking, some to collect, some to destroy. I trust you to carry the Green name, not with fear, but with the dignity Father taught us. Do not run. Face them. And when you do, remember, the jacket you wear is armor, not shame. My throat tightened. He knew. He knew even then what the jacket meant. Not rags, not embarrassment, but armor. A reminder of where we came from. I pressed the letter to my chest, eyes burning. For the first time in years, I felt Walter's voice like he was still beside me. But then another sound intruded, the ringing of my phone. It was Erica. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Dad, I know you went to the bank. Tell me what you found. It's none of your concern, I said flatly. It is my concern, she screamed. You're old. You're weak. You don't know what to do with that kind of responsibility. You'll ruin everything, just like you ruined your marriage, just like you ruined your life clinging to that filthy house. Give me the documents. I can handle it. My hand tightened on the phone. Her words dug at scars she knew too well. But I didn't let her hear the pain. I only said, calm and steady, no. She cursed and hung up. I sat there in the vault room, my pulse hammering, and realized something chilling. If Erica knew I went to the bank, someone had told her. And if someone told her, then other eyes were watching me too. Walter's enemies might already know the box was opened. I left the bank quickly, scanning the street as I stepped out. A black sedan idled across the road, its windows too dark. A shiver crawled up my spine. I turned away, walking briskly toward the bus stop, the weight of the ledger and letters heavy in my bag. My jacket flapped in the wind like a flag. That night, I barely slept. The ledger lay on the kitchen table, its numbers glowing in the dim lamplight like ghosts. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I hadn't done in years, and stared at the pages, Names, dates, places, debts. Some were scratched out, others circled in red. My own name appeared twice, once next to the development project, once next to a loan I had no memory of. Walter had used me. My loyalty had been currency, yet even in his betrayal, he had trusted me to be the one to clean it all up. I thought of Erica, her contempt, her greed. If she ever got her hands on this ledger, she'd sell it to the highest bidder, even if it destroyed us. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. I sipped the whiskey, its burn steadying me. Then I heard it. A sound outside, faint, like gravel crunching under heavy feet. My body froze. Slowly I rose, walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. A man stood by the curb, leaning on the black sedan I had seen earlier. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face, hard, scarred, eyes like steel. He exhaled smoke and looked straight at my window. My chest tightened. Walter's enemies had arrived. I stepped back, heart racing. But then something strange happened. Instead of fear, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. My brother had warned me, and I had been humiliated enough in this life to know one thing. I was done bowing. I put on the jacket, slid the ledger into its inner pocket, and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. If they were coming, they would find me ready. The knock on the door came 20 minutes later, low and heavy, 3 deliberate raps. I didn't move at first. Then I stood, walked to the door, and placed my hand on the knob. My daughter thought I was weak, that I was nothing but an old man in a worn coat. Walter's enemies thought I was just a name on a page. They were all wrong, because this old jacket carried more history than any of them could bear, and I was about to remind them what dignity looked like when it was sharpened into a weapon. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the old house like a drumbeat. I tightened my grip on the doorknob, my heart thundering but my hand steady. When I opened it, 2 men stood there, not just one. The one I'd seen outside with the scar across his cheek and the cold eyes, and another, broader, with a shaved head and hands like stone blocks. They didn't smile, didn't waste breath pretending. The scarred man spoke first, his voice low, carrying the weight of promises already broken. "Mr. Green, we need to talk." I let them in. Maybe a younger version of me would have hidden, pretended I wasn't home, but not now. I led them into the kitchen, where the ledger still lay on the table, half shadowed under the lamp. Their eyes went to it immediately. The broader man sat down without asking, the chair creaking under his weight, while Scarface leaned against the wall, cigarette smoke still clinging to his coat. "Your brother owed," Scarface said simply, "and debts don't die just because he did. You understand?" I nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. "I understand. But I didn't make his deals." "Doesn't matter," the broad one grunted. "Your name's in the book. Twice. That makes you responsible." I felt the words settle heavy in my gut. Walter had dragged me into his shadows long ago, and now I was paying the price. But shame gave way to something hotter, stronger. "My brother used my name without telling me," I said, voice steady. "If you came here expecting me to hand you money to cover debts I never agreed to, you'll be disappointed." Scarface's lip curled into something like a smile, but darker. "We're not here to negotiate. We're here to remind you the clock is ticking. The estate may have passed to you, but the debt's passed too. You have 2 weeks. Pay, or you'll wish you had died with him." He tapped the ledger with one finger. Then both men stood. They didn't slam the door as they left. They didn't have to. Their silence was louder than any threat. I sat alone again, the house colder now. I poured another glass of whiskey, the burn sharper than before, and thought of Erica. If she ever knew about this, she'd use it against me, twist it into proof that I was weak, that I was dragging her name down. She wouldn't see the truth, that I was holding the green legacy together with my bare hands. I stayed up until dawn, flipping through the ledger again, hunting for clues. Among the scrawled numbers, I noticed something. A repeated symbol in the margins, like a circle with a slash through it. I remembered Walter doodling it once when we were boys, saying it meant unfinished business. The same mark appeared next to 3 names, each one linked to properties around Richmond. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just debt, it was leverage. Walter had left me not just liabilities, but weapons. If I could trace these names, maybe I could find something that turned the balance in my favor. By morning, my eyes burned, but my resolve was steel. I shrugged on my jacket, tucked the ledger under my arm, and stepped out into the pale light. The first name on the list was Robert Mallory, tied to an old boxing gym on the south side. I hadn't been there in years, but when I walked in, the smell hit me immediately. Sweat, leather, chalk dust, memories of my youth, sparring with Walter until our knuckles bled. Mallory was older now, hunched behind a desk, his skin sallow. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. "Leonard Green, haven't seen you since your brother tried to turn this place into a front." My stomach tightened. That's what the ledger says too. "What did Walter leave behind here?" Mallory spat on the floor, shaking his head. "Nothing but trouble. He promised to back me, then pulled out when better money showed up. But he kept papers in my office, bottom drawer, locked. Said one day you'd come for them." My heart thumped as he tossed me a rusted key. Inside the drawer was a small safe box. I cracked it open and found more photographs. But these were different. They showed men in positions of power, judges, politicians, businessmen, meeting with Walter in quiet corners, exchanging envelopes, blackmail material. My brother hadn't just borrowed money. He'd collected secrets, and now those secrets were mine. I left the gym with the photos hidden under my jacket. On the bus ride home, I couldn't stop thinking. This was why Walter chose me. Not because I was smarter, not because I was ruthless, but because I knew the value of silence. Erica would have sold these pictures in an instant, burning every bridge for cash. But me, I understood patience. Still, I couldn't hide forever. That night, Erica barged into the house again, her fury sharp enough to cut the air. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, "but I know men came to see you. I know Uncle Walter's money isn't clean. You're going to destroy us." Her words were knives, but her eyes betrayed something softer. Fear. She wasn't just angry. She was scared of losing the world she thought she deserved. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You mocked me in front of everyone at that will reading. You called me nothing. But listen carefully, Erica. The people coming for me now don't care about designer shoes or shiny cars. They care about blood. If you want to survive what your uncle left behind, you stay out of my way." She froze, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but nothing came. For the first time in years, she saw me not as a weak old man, but as something else, something she couldn't name yet. She left without another word. Alone again, I spread the photographs on the table beside the ledger. Judges, politicians, men whose names could topple towers if spoken in the right rooms. Walter hadn't just left me debts. He had left me power. Dangerous, double-edged power. I touched the frayed cuff of my jacket and felt a strange calm. They mocked me for wearing this old thing, but now it was the cloak of a man standing at the center of a storm, and the storm was only beginning. The phone rang, shattering the silence. A deep voice on the other end, calm but edged. "Mr. Green, I believe you have something that belongs to us. We'll be in touch." The line went dead before I could answer. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with purpose. They were coming. But this time, I wasn't just waiting. I was preparing. Because dignity is not silence. Dignity, when sharpened, becomes justice. And justice, when cornered, becomes revenge. I sat at the kitchen table with the photographs spread like a gallery of sins, each face a reminder that my brother's life had been a ledger of favors and threats, and that ledger had become a map. I had no illusions about what I was holding. Power in those pictures was a dangerous thing, and I'd been ordinary enough my whole life to know that ordinary men don't survive climbing into extraordinary places unarmed. So I began to plan the slowest kind of revenge, the kind that wears a person thin until the people who laughed at him are the ones left naked under heat lamps. The first move was patience. I drove into the city and sat in a diner where men who had once dealt with Walter liked to drink bad coffee and say worse things. The clink of ceramic, the sour smell of gravy, the flicker of a fluorescent light. These were my accomplices, noise to hide the sound of a strategy clicking into place. I listened more than I spoke. Names surfaced like fish beneath the surface, men who had taken a favor and never repaid it, who had gambled on Walter's charm and then leaned on him when the charm wore thin. I left the diner with two things: a receipt stained with grease that had the name of a small real estate firm, and the feeling that the first domino could be nudged with something no one expected: truth. Back home, while Erica was out, probably pacing the rooms of some showroom apartment, imagining the life she thought she'd inherit, I made calls. I didn't threaten. I offered choices the way a surgeon offers an option, bluntly, clinically, without malice, but with certainty. To one small-time developer who'd cheated Walter, I offered reproduction prints of a photograph showing a meeting in the back of a restaurant where an envelope had passed hands. To an assistant judge who still drank too much at a certain bar, I slid a small, polite note asking whether he preferred charity or exposure. I watched the thin veneer of their composure crack. Men who had worn suits like armor now shuffled like boys caught with contraband. The ledger let me call names and dates. The photographs made those calls credible. I didn't burn them outright. There is strategy in holding a match close enough to make someone sweat without setting the house ablaze. That fear was a currency I could trade. Erica watched all of this like a hawk perched on the mantel, smaller in the doorway than I remembered, a woman who had learned to mask hunger with sarcasm. When I told her I had found photographs that would ruin reputations, she laughed at first, the laugh brittle as dry bones. "You mean blackmail?" she said, as if the word itself were a moral defect, and she the pure judge. Her princely contempt had been a reflex for years, but now her fingers twitched like a gambler's. "You're not going to stoop to that," she said, as if the world had never taught her how it really worked. I looked at her and saw fire, and for the first time, the particular shade of fear that comes when a person realizes the meal they expected will not arrive. I told her, quietly, "This isn't about revenge for me. It's about safety. It's about buying time, so that when men with bad faith come knocking, I can answer instead of folding." She stared. For a moment she wavered between indignation and a selfish glitter. Greed is a peculiar thing. It can be moral one second and malignant the next. "You're playing a dangerous game," she hissed. "You're going to get us killed." The words hit, and for the first time I felt the weight of what we were doing sweep through me like cold water. Danger wasn't a plot device. It was a fact with teeth. I nodded. "Maybe, but we won't be forced to beg." That night a car idled at the curb, soft headlights carving a pale crescent across the porch. I watched from the kitchen window, the fabric of the jacket against my palms like a familiar map. The men who came to the door this time were not muscle waiting for payment. They were politeness in tailored coats and the quiet menace of men who managed other men. They brought offers disguised as concern, advice on how to manage the estate, invitations to collaborate on dissolving liabilities. They spoke of mergers and trusteeships, of lawyers with kinder smiles. They were the kind of predators that ate reputations first and men second. I listened as one of them, soft shoes, softer words, suggested that I hand over control to a professional firm. "We can protect the family name," he said, meaning protect their interests and erase mine. He placed his leer in the air like a dessert. I smiled. Not the smile of a man who is winning now, but the steady, cold smile of someone who has read too many books and kept too many long evenings alive thinking. "I appreciate the thought," I said, "but my brother signed this for me. His last trust was specific." The man's smile thinned. "Leonardry," he said, with the false intimacy of a man preparing to take a pawn. "This world runs on decisions. Let us help you make better ones." I told him, plainly no. He left with the kind of silence that says the conversation will be resumed in different circumstances. The next morning, a small headline appeared in a city paper about an inquiry into a local developer's dealings. I didn't plant it. The photograph had done the work, released to a contact with patience and a thirst for truth. The article was careful, investigative, and whispered about names that overlapped with mine. I watched Erica read it aloud at breakfast, her fingers trembling. "This could be us," she said, and there was terror under the surface, the kind you can't fake. I reached across the table, took her hand, surprised both of us by how steady the gesture was. "Then keep your voice down," I said, "and keep your mouth closed." She looked up at me with a question in her eyes, the kind that a child asks when they discover a parent is not simply a fixture, but an actor in a play. "Are you going to give any of this away?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, not to them. Not to anyone who would sell us out for a tidy profit." In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in the city's corridors of power. I walked into rooms like a rumor, sat at tables like a promise, and let other men realize that secrets have a price and a wielder. I made offers that were simple: truth in exchange for withdrawal, exposure in exchange for silence. The ledger became a scalpel, not a hammer. Each disclosure peeled back a layer of Walter's alliances until men started to panic quietly, to call meetings under muted chandeliers and argue with the kind of voices that do not know fear because nothing had ever required it. Those men began to look for a scapegoat, and the circle narrowed to a handful of names. To my surprise, one of them was a man who had once been a friend of Walter's and who had had dealings with my own daughter. He had been kind to Erica at a holiday dinner once, bought her a drink, smiled as if he were an uncle with patience. I had always suspected that kindness was a currency in that world. Now, it was leverage. I confronted him at a church fundraiser where men bathed themselves in pious light and expensive cologne. I did not shout. I placed photographs on a pew and let the organ swell while he stared. His face changed in ways my daughters had never managed to. He offered the usual things: denial, then a trickle of confession, and finally, a deal. Back off, and he would quietly recommend to his associates that they distance themselves. When he left, he walked as if the earth had shifted under his feet. Word spread. Jonas began to mutter about loyalty and consequences. I was not ruthless. I was, at last, intentional. Erica watched as her world came unglued and then reassembled itself with a different center: me. Her posture changed incrementally from contempt to a protective, calm, fierce pride she had never shown her whole life. One night, when the house was quiet and rain had started its small diplomatic war on the roof, she sat across from me and said, flat and small, "I was wrong." It was not an apology dressed up in silk. It was a small, raw thing, but it landed like a seed. "Then learn," I answered, "because next time you might need to hold your own jacket." She looked at the old fabric, fingers tracing a worn seam as if she could read the story stitched there. "Will it end?" she asked. "Will the men stop?" I didn't know, but I knew this. Humiliation had been a fuel that burned slow, and revenge, if you let it, can be a righteous thing when it repairs what was broken. "It will change," I said, and the words were true in the way hope is true. Half promise, half plan. Outside, somewhere in the city, men I had unmasked were whispering strategy in rooms with curtained windows. I slept less, dreamed less, and thought more. There were nights when doubt sat with me at the table and we played cards just to pass the time, doubt peeking at my hand and smiling. I never forgot my brother's final words: "Be ready, and when the time comes, carry our name with dignity." I realized dignity was not a garment to wear to impress others. It was a set of decisions, like the ones I made at that kitchen table, like the ones that had made my life a runway for ridicule and now an instrument of reclamation. They mocked my jacket at a will reading. It had warmed me through winters but never armored me for this fight. Now it smelled of lemon oil and pipe smoke and the tang of old coffee, and every thread felt like a promise. I tightened the collar around my throat and listened for the next knock. The knock finally came 3 weeks later. Not soft, not hesitant, but heavy, as if the door itself owed them something. I stood in the hallway, jacket buttoned, ledger tucked inside, photographs sealed in an envelope. When I opened the door, Scarface was there again, the broad man beside him, and this time a third, a younger one, sharp suit, slick hair, a snake polished to gleam. He smiled, the kind of smile that pretends civility but carries a blade beneath the tongue. "Mr. Green," he said smoothly, "it's time we settled things once and for all." They didn't wait for an invitation. They entered like smoke. Scarface leaned against the wall, silent menace. The broad one hovered near the window. The younger one sat across from me at the kitchen table, right where Walter used to sit, and steepled his fingers. "You've been busy, whispering to men who should not be whispered to, moving pieces you shouldn't touch. My clients are not pleased." He let the words hang, expecting me to bend. But humiliation is a strange tutor. It can either break you or make you immune. I leaned back, calm, steady. "Your clients owe me," I said. "My brother's debts are real, but so are his secrets. I have proof of every hand he shook, every deal he buried. If you push me, I don't burn alone. We all burn." For the first time, the young man's smile faltered. Scarface straightened from the wall, the broad man's knuckles flexed. Silence weighed the room. I slid the envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the photographs, judges, developers, men caught in shadows they couldn't explain. "These are only a fraction, Ikai," I said. "The originals are safe. Try me, and tomorrow morning they'll be on every front page from here to Dixie." The young man's jaw tightened. He opened the envelope, thumbed through, and his polished arrogance cracked just enough for me to see the panic beneath. Scarface muttered something low, too soft for the others, but I caught it. Just like Walter, always had a knife hidden. I met his eyes. No, not like Walter. Walter played games. I'm not playing. The room felt like a fuse burning toward an unseen bomb. Then the young man closed the envelope, slid it back toward me, and stood. His voice was clipped now, the silk stripped away. "You've made yourself an enemy you can't handle." I smiled faintly, not out of joy but certainty. "No, I've made myself a man you can't erase." They left, heavy steps fading into the night, the sound of the car engine roaring down the street. I sat alone again, the silence ringing louder than their threats. My hands trembled only once and when I poured another glass of whiskey. But beneath the tremor was something stronger. Victory, small and temporary, but real. Erica came out from the hallway shadows then. She had been listening, her face pale, eyes wide. "You could have been killed," she whispered. I looked at her, the same daughter who had mocked me for my jacket, who had sneered at me in front of the lawyer, who had told me I would ruin everything. And for the first time, I saw not her scorn, but her fear, her recognition of what it meant to carry a name when it weighed more than gold. "Yes," I said simply. She sat across from me, tears glistening at the edge of her lashes. "I didn't know," she murmured. "I didn't know what he left behind. I didn't know you were—" Her voice broke. "Strong enough." I reached across, my hand rough, her hand trembling, and I said, "Strength isn't loud, Erica. It's surviving every time the world tries to bury you." She nodded, biting her lip, and I saw in her the girl she had once been, the one who used to run to me when she was afraid of thunderstorms, who trusted that I would hold the roof steady. That night, we didn't speak much more. We sat in silence, father and daughter, the ledger and photographs between us like the ghosts of choices past. In the weeks that followed, the storm quieted. The men who had threatened me pulled back, whispers circulating that Leonard Green was not to be toyed with. The ledger became less a weapon and more a shield, the photographs a deterrent rather than a sword. I used them carefully, strategically, not to destroy, but to contain. One by one, debt settled, voices hushed, hands withdrawn. My brother had left me fire, but I had learned to carry water with it. Erica changed too. She still bristled at times, still looked at the jacket with longing for something shinier, but there was no more mockery. She walked beside me at church, held my arm at family gatherings, introduced me not as a burden but as her father. People noticed. The same relatives who had chuckled at the will reading now lowered their eyes when I entered the room. Their laughter turned to silence. Dignity, once mocked, had become weight, and weight, carried long enough, becomes power. I often sat on the porch in the evenings, jacket around my shoulders, watching the sun sink low over the neighborhood. Children laughed in the streets, neighbors waved, and the house, the old house my parents built, stood steady. It was no mansion, no symbol of wealth, but it was ours, and it had outlasted ridicule, betrayal, greed, and even death. I would think of Walter then, my brother, reckless and charming, gone but never silent. I would hear his voice in my memory. Carry our name with dignity. I had. But I had also carried it with fire. And sometimes fire is what dignity needs to be seen. One evening, Erica sat beside me on the porch, sipping tea instead of wine. She looked at me quietly, her face softer, older somehow. "Dad," she said, "do you ever regret not leaving? Not chasing the kind of life Uncle Walter had?" I thought about it, long and hard, about the years I spent patching this house, wearing this jacket, walking to jobs that barely paid enough, enduring her mockery, enduring the world's. Then I smiled, weary but proud. No, because the man who chases shine ends up burned. The man who carries weight ends up standing. She nodded slowly, her hand resting lightly on mine. For once, silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peace. And now I ask you, listening to my story, living your own battles, what would you do if the people you loved mocked you, humiliated you, tried to erase you? Would you fold under their laughter? Or would you rise, steady as stone, and make them see the fire behind your scars? And you, would you have the courage to confront your own family for justice,